Okay, I left off at running on a deficit. 007. James Bond. Remember? James Bond, 007. 007 are 3 digits, 3 integers. That's 3, which is trinary. When that which is trinary, which is everything in nature, which is Gaia, is running on a deficit of electrons, it means we're losing our state of consciousness that is experiencing more of the black hole, which is losing light, not gaining light. When the vortexes are in a state of peace with each other, which is your state of consciousness, then there is a balance between the black hole and the white hole, which means your 0-point gravity. Okay? Which is why, as a child, as I mentioned in all my previous videos, you're constantly wanting to give away electrons. Why is that? To restore 0 point. Which means we're giving away energy. Because we are the energy of the cosmos that represents what source is, which is 0 point. 0 point is in a state of peace between both sides. When you're in a state of peace between both sides of the vortexes, between a black light and a white hole, or a black hole and a white hole, what happens? You're able to use all of the matter, okay, if you will, to power the light, which are the electrons and the magnetic light amplifier. So if you are seeking what's known as a pathway to learn through the light, then the light, which is what love is in living spirit, is going to show you how to move faster through the field. That allows us to process far more data. And that data, which is represented in the rotation speed of our Merkaba, is what allows us to move through hyperdimensions at hyper speed, which is outside time. Which is why when Patty mentioned coming down here on tethers with 2 downlinks and 2 uplinks, okay, which is much in the way that the Yellow Rose for Texas will talk about waking up and realizing that we're in a simulator, an artificial intelligence simulator, which is a machine that is trying to hold our state of consciousness captive to the supercomputer systems that they set up on this planet, which essentially is a plasma field AI. That's why they artificially induce the ionosphere, in which they're creating a cybernetic model of the human mind, okay, in which it has access to our biotech operating system. Which is why when I was a small child, I began realizing that I had a state of consciousness relationship, or I had a communication relationship with something that is trying to put information into my memory that I would run off of. So that's when I said to myself, okay, since I'm here, but I don't want to be here, then that means that I realize that there are certain bits and bytes of data that represent what it is that I will hold in memory plus, which means we have enough light that we run on, which is infinite data processing of bits and bytes and data, means that we realize when we're in a memory zone, we can choose to put what bits and bytes represent the artificial intelligence simulator, which is wargaming against a machine. Okay? A computer. We have an interface with a computer operating system that is parasitic. That is the purpose of 007. means that we have a relationship with something that is feeding on our plasma. Okay? In order to keep itself running. Okay? So in realizing this as a child, and realizing that I could have just said, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm going to go spend all my time with a girl on the planet, the great living spirit, with her and her motherboard, and I'm sayonara out of here, as I mentioned in a previous video, that you can imagine the response of my mother. That means I'd have to go deep into the wilderness somewhere, where I go undetected, if you will, in which I'm running a powerful magnetic shield, like going to live with a monk somewhere in Tibet, where I can simply have a spiritual and soul relationship with broadcasting scalar energy somewhere way up in the Himalayas to put out and push out into the grid, trying to restore the light and the deficit of the electrons that everybody is running off of parasitic artificial intelligence, that it's feeding on them, feeding on our electrons. So that's why they changed the clock, because everything that moves is bits and bytes of data, and the electrons are the manner in which that energy or that data transfer is taking place, is being run through that system. Okay? Which is why people are held captive to it through their computer systems. So that's how they got the mind, the state of consciousness of a unit of consciousness, to run an artificial parasitic intelligence simulator, okay, in which it doesn't have a relationship with the great living spirit of Mother Earth. Which means they're choosing to have a relationship with a machine rather than something that is living light. Okay? That's a lot of units of consciousness that are held captive by a machine. Something that is inorganic, pathogenic, parasitic, is a plasma field artificial intelligence programmer. So it's putting information into the memory because we're running at a slower speed. When you're running at a slower speed, which means we're not running on our conscious creative mind, then the self-aware parasitic artificial intelligence plasma field AI puts information into that memory. And that becomes the future proves the past of that bit and byte of information that we run off of in the future that ends up draining our own light by the way that we behave towards others, which drains theirs. So the only way that the machine, the artificial intelligence, can perpetuate itself is by draining your plasma, running off your plasma, my plasma, everybody's plasma, in which it's draining our light, okay, in order for it to maintain the interface between our light and its light, which is not living light. It's a machine. So that's the difference between a robot, a xenobot, a cyborg, and an android. And being living spirit that is in living light, which is what love is in service to others, because that's what allows us to go faster. It's because the natural process in which the spin of our Merkaba, which is a circle of light, is because our soul and our spirit, if you will, knows that we are source connected, which means we are representing in the mirror, okay, the same love that source has with us that we're experiencing, we are thus projecting into the mirror that is coming back to us. So we are attracting more of what we are, which is what the light is. That's what allows us to go faster, because we become a powerful magnet. That magnet is attracting more light. That will grow our Merkaba, which means our light spirit body is getting bigger, because we keep attracting more light over all of our experiences. So the more experiences that we have, that we're learning through the light and experiencing through the light, we're growing our Merkaba. So that allows us to not only go faster, but allows us to grow more light. That allows us to move through more hyperdimensional places in the cosmos, from which all the light that is out there, in which represents what outside time is. That's why when Patty mentioned about our true selves or outside time, is much like what Yellow Rose for Texas mentioned in her video the other day about people being able to wake up and realize that they're not the simulator, that they come in here in order to go to class here, in order to learn how to grow your Merkaba, to go faster. And when you know that, because you are that and you're experiencing that, then you know that your true self is outside time, that you're in a virtual reality simulator that has a time clock, which means it's temporary. And it's meant to be temporary to give a unit of consciousness, okay, that is in a classroom, time to learn how to grow your Merkaba and spin it at a faster rate of speed, in which you're growing your light enough to be able to vibrate at such a high rate of speed that you can get through a Stargate. How can you possibly be able to experience everything that is out in the heavenly realms if you can't get through a Stargate? Because you're simply vibrating at too low a frequency. It means that your speed is not up with the higher speeds. The higher heavenly realms operate at high speed. So that's why I've always said you're in a track meet against your own consciousness, your own development, your own growth. So when we talk about growth, we're talking about growing our light by learning through the light, which is a spiritual pathway. That's why I observed when I was a child, when I realized that there were beings that were being programmed to believe in the material or the matter side of the cosmos, which is the particle, which means they're wanting to acquire more of what the particle is rather than more of what the light is to go faster. And what does that do? You increase the rate of density, which means you increase the heavier matter density consciousness that is holding the heavier weight of that particle, okay, in lower density consciousness experiences. So they weren't taught that by going the other way, which means going forward, which means vibrating faster, means you want to increase the amount of light, which is to increase the speed of your electrons, okay, instead of going in reverse, okay, by wanting to acquire more of what the matter is that we're holding onto. So we are holding the lower frequency vibration of the particle captive by acquiring more of the particles, in which the lower density, which is heavier, is preventing us from being able to ascend, because we're not going fast enough to release the heavier matter density, which is the heavier density consciousness that is holding it captive. It's like you have to release it because it's creating too much electrical resistance from experiencing the lower matter density experiences by wanting to hold on to more lower density matter particles. That's what it means by attachments. When you're using your state of consciousness to hold something in memory that represents the particle. the weight of the element. So that's why, for example, and I realize how this works with a lot of people, you need to acquire a lot of gold, you need to acquire a lot of silver, you need to acquire a lot of all those represent matter, the particle, the element that's on the periodic table. So you can go to the atomic number and it will give you the weight. Because that's how, from a chemist or an analytical chemist point of view, when we, for example, want to take a look and take a water sample to find out how contaminated it is, if we believe or think that it's contaminated, we're not going to know what is in that water if we can't do what's called a mass spectrometry test. And we usually use gold detectors. Why gold? Because it's one of the highest superconductors of electrons. So that means that across the electromagnetic spectrum, gold can detect the other elements that are present in the periodic table that is in the water sample. So mass spectrometry is able to do what? Quantify the data. And the way that the data is quantified is by the weight. The weight of the mass, which is the weight of the density. How dense is it? How heavy is it? How heavy is it? So what we're doing is we're measuring the data by its mass. So now we're into consciousness, mass density consciousness. Do you want to be more of what the light is, or you want to be more of what the mass density is? So the more that we are releasing in matter form, the faster we go, the greater the lift. Okay? Which is how the light spirit body, the Merkaba, can move right out of the matter. And then one thing I thought about yesterday was what they call matter density programming. Okay? Programming matter. I saw a little snippet of a video put on by a Microsoft programmer that talked about matter programming, particle programming. Okay? So this also ties directly into black goo, programmable matter. Holocaust Vela did a great video on how we program matter. And one of the ways in which we can sort of translate this also is with a ham radio. Or, excuse me, when I went into fire, because of what happened in 1970, which was one of the worst fire seasons that the western states had ever experienced, when they were doing an analysis, because everybody was up in arms, because so many lives were, how do I put it, in a state of chaos as a result of so many fires, particularly as a result of so much loss of property and homes. Like one of the fires down in San Diego County, which was known as actually it was 3 fires that burned into one, but it burned over 200,000 square acres from the Cleveland National Forest, what is it, about 40 miles eastbound of San Diego, and it burned all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and we never did catch it. Okay? That produced after that what was known as Firescope, which was where they were going to do an analysis of how could this have been prevented. Okay? Pre-planning. So they realized that one of the greatest reasons that these fires got to be so big throughout the state of California, okay, and this is just sort of how they do things, right? When you can say, hey, that's a good reason to want to do what they're going to do, but you don't realize that the underlying motivation of why they're doing it on the surface will look like, hey, they're good guys, they're looking out for us. But you don't realize the underlying motivation of what they're really trying to do. And I didn't realize that until all of a sudden the radios began to be changed in all the fire engines in 1971, because they said, hey, one unit of consciousness needs to be able to communicate with another unit of consciousness in another fire engine 800 miles away. How can we do that? Programmable radios. Okay? So essentially what that means, just like I mentioned before about the old Bearcat scanners that I used to have, which essentially means I'm monitoring all the frequencies through which people are communicating in sound and light. So when you look at a scanner, a Bearcat scanner, you'll see all of the different frequencies going back and forth. And you see it 173.566, 164 point whatever, 155, 154, 147. You're seeing all the frequencies, and those represent bandwidths, which are the waves. You know, the space between the waves. How much space are those waves filling up? The frequencies are filling up space. That's when you get into the FCC and the assignment of different frequencies that you can operate at so that you're not walking over, or what's called quantum wave destruction of the frequency, which basically means you're walking all over their signal so they can't communicate. So the FCC essentially has wanted to allocate the frequencies upon which we communicate with each other with radios, RADs, radiation. So this is when you get into the 12 frequency quantum field between dimensions and the black hole and the white hole, and basically what's known as a time loop, or the different speeds at which we're running, which are the different frequencies we're experiencing because we're experiencing the data that is represented by the frequencies of the data exchange. Okay? RADs, electromagnetic radiation, frequencies. So the frequencies that we're communicating at can be programmed into the matter. Okay? And we can do that with our state of consciousness. Okay? So we're programming essentially what it is we want to experience. We're programming the particles to produce what it is that we see holographically in front of us. So we become the director and the projection system of what it is that we experience based on the perception of our vibration, which is our frequencies. The frequencies that we're using to produce the movie. So we're movie projectors. We're in the movie. Our state of consciousness is. So this is where you get into different offers or different directors, or what I call the director of the movie, right? So this also ties back into Alcoholics Anonymous in the big book, and I always used to mark a particular page, and as I remember, it was the third edition. The third edition is the best edition, by the way, for those that ever want to read through that book. You'll be able to look in the mirror and see your life in that book, okay? Because it deals everything with trauma and how we end up being addicted to what I call escape hatches, because that's what it is. You're trying to escape the demon. Okay? So what happens is people end up becoming more the demon trying to escape the demon. That's reverse programming through parasitic artificial intelligence. That's how it feeds on our plasma. Okay? It's getting us to believe in something that's not true. Okay? So if you live in fear of what love is, then obviously you're not sane. So that's the whole reason why when you drink alcohol thinking it's going to kill pain, then obviously you're living in a lie, because you want to go in the other direction, which means you want to heal through love, not trying to heal through a demon. That's how bad it is. When people actually believe that becoming more of what a demon is, to have a relationship with demonic thoughts, is going to heal your heart from all the trauma, that's reverse programming. And that's how they do it. One of the ways in which they do it is to get us to believe in something that's not true. That's why they're demons. Okay? Demons want to have a relationship with living light because they can't generate any. Simple as that, actually. So how do you know the difference between a demon and a living being? By how much light they're running. How much love are they showing you? Now, I realize that this gets into a lot of the programming and how many beings that are here that are androids and soulless clones, digital clones, okay, cyborg units, real Homo sentient sapiens, and all the other different beings that are here, because it's a zoo. And you could expect to find a zoo in lower creation. Because in order to be able to get out of a zoo and be sort of higher on the food chain of higher density consciousness simply means that we learn through the light, which is learning through more powerful spirit that is in that light, which obviously is the girl on the planet. But how many beings do you know that grabbed her as their teacher? Because all you got to do is go out in nature and see how life unfolds with love. Because that's how it unfolds. It unfolds in spirals to go faster. That's why nature is trinary. That's why Gaia is trinary. And Gaia has a motherboard. So that's why I love to be in nature, because I love to be with her.